Welcome back to Sacred Synergy. Today is Thursday, May 28th, and this is episode number 12 featuring Robert Nicastro. Robert Nicastro is the executive director of the Center for Christogenesis and is a theologian, teacher, and writer whose research explores the convergence of religion, science, and artificial intelligence. His work focuses on how emerging technologies are reshaping human identity, planetary consciousness, and the future of religious thought. His doctoral dissertation, The Future as Soul Support, Metaphysics, Hyperphysics, and the Theology of Teilhard de Chardin, offers a reinterpretation of Teilhard's cosmic vision as a compelling metaphysical framework for addressing the complex challenges of the 21st century. Robert and I sit down to talk about his personal scholarly endeavors as well as his work with the Center for Christogenesis. We do discuss their upcoming name change to the World Institute for Science, Religion, and Culture, or WISER, as well as how Teilhard and evolution have impacted Robert's learning and his own spiritual journey. We also talk about the gifts and challenges of being a young theologian and where Robert sees hope for the future within the church. I really appreciate Robert's gift of being able to return to scripture and tradition, especially within its roots, and his ability to articulate that and transpose it into a more modern language where it extends to a more sophisticated and integrated understanding of the cosmos. And you'll soon hear how seamlessly he does this. As Robert also mentions, the Center for Christogenesis' 10th anniversary conference is coming up in November and will be a tremendous opportunity to link up with the like minds and hearts for an in-person event. You can go to christogenesis.org for more info. This is, like I said, a really great opportunity to connect in person with people like Robert, Ilya, Kathy Duffy, myself, and all the familiar faces of the Teilhardian theological and spiritual community. And this weekend, tomorrow, begins the American Teilhard Association's annual event and retreat featuring Dr. Don Viney, and the title of that event is Reimagining a Universe in the Making, Teilhard and Process Theology. Registration has closed at this point for in-person attendance. However, you can certainly join us online via Zoom for Saturday's keynote presentation and the breakout discussion groups. More information can be found on teilhardechardin.org or delsford.org. Finally, I want to thank Jeff Bezos, friend of the show, as my book Sacred Synergy is now available for purchase on Amazon. I know that not everyone supports or shops with Amazon, yet if you do, you are now able to order Sacred Synergy and have it shipped, maybe dropped off with a drone, which has been directed by an AI, which has amalgamated a virtual mapping of our world using your metadata from your cell phone, from Google Maps, to your front door. That's just a little bit of humor. Yet I am grateful to have access to such technology to be able to promote my work and to have it available to more people who are hopefully moved by it in some way in a positive and life-giving direction. Like I said, that's just a little bit of humor. This podcast is my own. And as much as I like to present myself as an intellectual with deep thinking and really hearty reflection, it's going to have to encompass this aspect of my personality as well. So I'm grateful to be able to provide, like I said, my work to a larger audience, and Amazon has let me do that, as strongly as some people may feel against it. Yet at any rate, I really want to extend a sincere and humble thank you to all of my family, friends, and supporters who have already purchased a copy of Sacred Synergy. Thank you. It is a work that comes from deep within me, from in my heart, and I am grateful to be able to share that with you, number one, and I also pray that it may impact your life for the better. So without any further ado, let's get into this conversation at the heart of evolution. Robert, welcome to Sacred Synergy.
Thank you, Andrew. A pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with me. We first met, and I think it was, you might have to correct me, 2018 or 19 at the Sugarloaf campus on Chestnut Hill. And I was the Center for, believe it was the Omega Center at the time, right? And its naming. And the American Teilhard Association had a joint conference event there. And I believe you were working on your doctoral degree with Ilya. And that's when we first met. Does that sound right?
That sounds perfectly spot on. We were the Omega Center just transitioning into the Center for Christogenesis at that time. And yes, I was doing my doctoral coursework just beginning it around 2019, in fact.
Yeah, I remember meeting you there, and Jillian as well, who was also eventually going to work for Ilya. And then, yeah, now we are, kind of come full circle where you've completed your doctoral degree. You're now the executive director of the Center for Christogenesis, and you're even preparing for a new transition in terms of your naming, which we can get to eventually. But why don't you tell our audience who you are and what you do with most of your time in the world?
Well, thank you, Andrew. As you already mentioned, I just finished my doctoral degree at Villanova. I specialized in the thought of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, particularly focusing on his hyperphysics. And so I'm now considered, I suppose, a theologian and a writer.
Yeah,
And I serve as the executive director of the Center for Christogenesis. And I will just say, because it's very much relevant to the probably kicking off the discussion, that the name change, this is probably a natural opportunity.
sure.
So we are transitioning into the World Institute for Science, Religion, and Culture, or what's called WISER, without the C. And
Okay.
and this name change, I think, is significant. We've been talking about it for a while, Ilya and I, and the larger team and community at the center. It's significant because we want it to be known that our mission is still very much continuous with the larger vision of Christogenesis. We're still very much doing that work while adopting a new language to express ever ancient, ever new realities, which I think is deeply Teilhardian in character. Teilhard himself coined terms, as I'm sure your audience knows, like the noosphere, omega, Christogenesis itself, precisely because the inherited vocabulary at the time could not possibly carry the full weight of what he was seeing, experiencing, and thinking through this new material reality of 21st century science, what that was gifting to us. So still at the heart of all our work is a simple conviction that a coherent and compelling relationship between God and the world has the power to renew our zest for life, and that the world at this moment desperately needs that renewal. So I consider myself, back to your question, contributing to that in my own way and in terms of the larger mission and vision of our organization, our nonprofit.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I like how you're using more both expansive and inclusive language in that sense, while staying true to the core mission in that. It's very excellent.
Thank you.
So, when along your journey did you come to meet Teilhard?
I had heard the name Teilhard for years, but frankly, it was through Ilya Delio's book, The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. Ilya, both a mentor, friend, and colleague, as well as the founder of the Center for Christogenesis. So through her book, The Unbearable Wholeness of Being, that gave me a real entry point into Teilhard's thought. And in fact, another friend and mentor at that time gifted that book to me in May of 2014, just before I left for major seminary. He thought, and quite rightly as it turned out, that Teilhard's vision would be especially useful for engaging the kinds of questions our generations, today's generations, are genuinely and actually wrestling with. So, just to give you an example of the aspects of that mission and vision that I find particularly relevant for our time, there's the search for meaning in a world accelerating toward greater and greater technological change. There's the ecological crisis, certainly. There's what it means for how we understand our place and presence within a larger cosmos, a cosmos that is still becoming. There is the spiritual hunger that persists, perhaps especially among people who have stepped away from institutional religion that has disaffected them because it wasn't particularly nourishing. And there's, I think, again, particularly Teilhardian, this deep longing for a framework that can hold both science and religion together without forcing anyone to choose between either one of them. So Teilhard speaks certainly directly to all of that and more. And that's what I found particularly inspiring about this larger cosmic perspective, and why I think it can give reasons for hope in an age that often seems so hopeless.
I appreciate you focusing on hope. I know that that is a primary theme within Teilhard's work, And working with Dr. John Haught a little bit, that's something that he emphasized to me as being so central to that vision, and the way in which we, like you and I, and these, Teilhardians, are doing our work is really to convey that hope, no matter if we're talking about noosphere, megapoint, hyperphysics, divinization, all of these complex themes, or rather, all of these complex themes that Teilhard gives a great awareness to through his work. It really needs to come down to hope and love in terms of how we're delivering that.
And it's deeply scriptural through and through. So when we're really searching for that resonance that connects Teilhard's novel vision to the great tradition of Christianity and Catholicism, we can find it there very clearly, in fact.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that someone gave you The Unbearable Wholeness of Being by Iliad right as you were entering major seminary. Was that a pretty pivotal moment for you in your discernment process as, you were cracking open this text and diving into these ideas? What was that like for you?
It was incredibly transformative. And I think the deepest things we often do often come through encounters with death. So
Mm,
honestly, Andrew, it was right around that point that my mentor who gifted me that book passed away.
mm,
And I think when you lose someone, you are immediately confronted with certainly the dramatic weight rather of grief, as well as the question of what exactly loss means.
yeah.
Where does this person go? Is the particularity of this person's existence still continuing on and also still very much part and parcel of who I am and what he, she, they did to my identity? So in that sense, it was a very pivotal moment of coming upon Teilhard's work because I realized that classic philosophical and theological frameworks, whatever their depth and beauty, and there is much to it, seriously struggle here with this dimension of death and loss because they tend to locate ultimate meaning outside the material world in a realm of pure form or eternal essence that stands apart from matter. Plato and Aristotle, respectively, gave us that tradition. And for a while, it was very good and very compelling. But Teilhard, in his time, refused that dualism, as you know. For him, matter is truly the birthplace of spirit, and that spirit is constantly being born anew through this evolutionary process. It's the very medium through which consciousness and love develop and deepen every day. So, in his vision, death at that time, and as I came to understand it, became transformation and became
Mm,
transformative within my life. It was a threshold in an ongoing process of convergence, wholeness, and union. And I learned that reframing doesn't dissolve the grieving process, certainly not, nor should it, but it gave it somewhere to go.
mm.
It placed loss within a larger cosmic story, a story that is still being written, as John Haught often reminds us. So at that moment, I was able to see my own theological interests beyond even a seminary structure because he was a priest, my mentor. And he was the reason why I even considered priesthood as a viable vocation for my life at that time. But that death really allowed me to rethink and reconfigure my entire way of being in the world and what might be even better. So I hope I answered your question. That was a really rich question.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your answer, as candid as it was. I appreciate your sharing about your mentor and about loss and about how you were processing that because you're now the second person that I've had on this podcast. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, this is episode number 12 I'm recording at the moment. And you're the second guest who has brought up that aspect of loss through death and absence and what we do from there and how important that is. Yeah, yeah. So, how about vocationally? How was getting into Teilhard's vision transformational for you vocationally as you're entering seminary? You felt that call from, you considered that call from someone who you consider a mentor who was a priest. So, how was that changing you vocationally as you got into his vision?
Well, interestingly enough, Teilhard himself was a Jesuit priest, right? And he would, within his whole scope of vision, he struggled with how do I reconcile science and religion? Well, at that time, that's exactly what I was doing. And my thought was that the seminary context could help me create a better framework of interpretation or framework of understanding for bringing science and religion together, and therefore helping people feel particularly nourished by this greater cosmic perspective. And I realized that Teilhard struggled his whole life by the Catholic institutional authorities as he sought to create this new vision. And that breaking open for me, reading his biographical details very carefully, understanding how he arrived moment by moment to new insights, made me realize that there's enough struggle in life that I don't need to manufacture more. And this path, while admirable, doesn't need to be my own. I can struggle in new and different ways too, and those could be equally redeemable and equally necessary for my own insights, opinions, and theological perspectives. So I think reading his life and juxtaposing it with mine allowed me to see where there could be both points, important points of overlap that I certainly would want to hang on to, and that could be very rich and enriching for carrying my own ideas into contributing to the theological corpus, as well as the points of that are discontinuous, that are unhelpful, that actually can serve as a greater source of joy, because that's not my path. I don't want to get too far afield here, but all by way of saying, I think it's very important. I think Teilhard really belongs, his life as a whole, within the writings of the saints, right? I think he is certainly a saint in his own right. And the lives of the saints, rather, that's the language I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And the lives of the saints really allow us to see how to live very holy and wholesome lives. So I really saw that in him, and I treated him as such. And that really helped me, as the Catholic Church always teaches us and enjoins us to do. Look to the lives of those who are holy in order to help illuminate how you should live your own life in the greatest degree of holiness possible. Because that's what we're all called to, and I saw it all throughout his writings, unapologetically.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your honest answer. And as we were exploring before the transition in the name from first Omega Center for Christogenesis, now to Wiser, as you were at that time in your life when you were first getting into Teilhard to the time now when you're executive director of this organization, you're having such an impact, how have you come to understand, or what was the evolution of your understanding of that term Christogenesis?
Yeah, another very rich and powerful question. So I've done a lot of thinking about Christogenesis, and certainly I have not exhausted the term. I don't think anybody can, and I don't think it was meant to, but
Mm.
it is certainly a name. It rather names the ongoing cosmic process of personalization, love, union, and wholeness. So, as I understand it, it describes the movement of the universe toward this greater depth, greater interiority, greater capacity for relationship. And again, while Christogenesis itself is not reducible to Christianity or even to the historical Jesus, and I don't think Teilhard intended it to be, Jesus certainly functions as a kind of archetype or model of what this process looks like when it becomes fully conscious of itself in human life. So I guess just as a for instance, in Jesus, we see the pattern of the cosmos embodied and enacted. How? Radical openness to the other, self-gift without self-loss, a union that differentiates rather than dissolves. And that principle that Teilhard coined, union differentiates, is essential here. And it's essential in the life of Jesus for what it means to love genuinely and what it means to bring together in a way that union truly maximizes one's personhood, does not flatten or erase it. It actually draws it out more fully. So I think that Christogenesis is a naming process more than a label itself, and it's the name we do give to this ongoing enactment principle of union differentiates. So it's about relationship, it's about love, it's about energy.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's can be looked at as a verb, it can be a noun. It's interesting how interchangeable it is in that sense. And some of the key words that I wrote down as you were speaking there were relationship, embodiment, integration, union, differentiating. And those are all core to Teilhard's thought, which of course would inspire such a term. But I think it goes back to what you were saying about Jesus being a model and how we as humans need, like the lives of the saints, for example, you just mentioned in a previous breath, or we really need a model. And you talk about how children need a mother figure and a father figure. As adults, we really need models of what it means to be whole, of what it means to be integrated, of what it means to embody our faith. And I appreciate how you're able to explain that in your own words through that term, Christogenesis.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very powerful term and it doesn't need to be alienating. And I think that's what we at the Center for Christogenesis and you at the American Teilhard Association are trying to do every day. To be truly Teilhardian is to be truly inclusive
Yeah.
while still holding on to the pearls of the past and showing how they have renewed energy in the present rather.
Yeah, I was just talking with someone who comes from a Mennonite background on a previous episode, and we were just sharing an appreciation for these terms that Teilhard lends us for the spiritual life: growth, passivity, diminishment, so forth and so on, right? And activity, passivity, diminishment. But how they apply across the spiritual spectrum, it doesn't matter your tradition. You can still experience spiritual growth, diminishment, divinization, right? Even if you are practicing another faith tradition outside of the Christian umbrella in that way.
That's true planetization, right? We need to draw from the vast reservoir of religious energies. And that's the only way we'll actually have a full comprehensive picture of who we are and where we're going at any given moment. Obviously,
Mm,
that constantly expands. It's the horizon of the horizons, but we do need a moment that allows us all to see together, but not necessarily see the same.
mm, I appreciate that. So this is something that came up a little bit briefly before, and it's something that you just presented on, which was the topic of hope.
Hmm.
So, what signs of emergence and transformation do you see or are you experiencing in the world today that give you hope?
Well, given everything that is going on in today's world and society, I think the fact that we are still plodding along, still showing up, still asking the deep questions is itself a form of hope and real hope, and perhaps an underrated one. So I've been giving this a lot of thought, and it's the thought is still going through my thoughts because I just gave the webinar, as you mentioned, and
Sure.
one of the themes that I brought up was the Hebrew prophets themselves understood something about this. They did not speak hope into favorable circumstances. They spoke it into exile, into corruption, into institutional despair and betrayal, into the apparent collapse of everything within them and around them that they had trusted. So hope, I think, in the prophetic tradition, and hope as Teilhard himself described it, is far from naive optimism about the immediate future. It is, as I describe it, stubborn fidelity to a
Mm,
larger story, process, perspective, scope of life than what is currently available. And evolution very much teaches us this same lesson, just perhaps in different language. Life has never moved forward by avoiding difficulty, by avoiding struggle. And this harkens back to my example of my mentor and his death and reading Teilhard through the life as a truly living saint and seeing how his struggle was different from mine, but struggle nonetheless. The whole process of evolution about finding hope is moving through all of the darkness and despair, moving through mass extinctions, moving through radical environmental shifts, not to excuse them, not to minimize them, but to see within the larger cosmic story that what emerged on the other side was always more complex,
yeah.
always more differentiated, always more conscious than what came before it. So something is still seeking to come through, even now. And that for me is why I'm so hopeful. And I am. And Teilhard wouldn't say it's something, right? He'd say it's someone that's emerging. But again, depending upon what your faith tradition is, we don't have to necessarily put a face to it. We can use any model that allows that full breadth and full power of consciousness, love, and union to emerge, to color how we move forward together. And that, I think, is in a nutshell what gives me hope.
That's a great answer. That's a
Thank
great
you.
answer because it acknowledges the reality of what's actually happening. And it looks back to the past to say, is there anything, worthwhile that we've accomplished that we haven't had to suffer and struggle through to some degree, right?
Absolutely.
That's
And
a
so,
lesson that I'm really trying to drive home with my children, their little children, and they're learning new skills, riding a bike, doing this, doing that, right? And it's like these things don't just come naturally. I mean, some of us have that God-given ability where we are, the natural, as the movie is phrased, right? Or maybe we are a once born soul where we just out of the womb and then throughout the rest of our lives feel this very close relationship with God. But the other 99.99% of the population, I feel like we go through these movements, and it's a matter of not trying to negate them or mute them or dull them or try and cover them up in any way, but rather to really feel them, embody them, engage them with, like you said, the fullness of our consciousness. Because every time we can approach a very complex situation, at least I'm always reminding myself, like, all right, this is complex and it's going to be a lot to sort through. But with that, there's going to come a greater consciousness, a more integrated awareness that was not present previously. And what a gift to work towards that, because then you don't lose that. You then build on it and build on it and build on it. And that's evolution.
correct me if I'm wrong, that's really the heart of your work today, isn't it?
I mean, that's what I've been trying to do for the most part. I'm grateful to hear you resound that back to me because hopefully someone's getting it. But yeah, it's really, trying to look at that in my own life and then trying to inspire others through the way that I might write or do a podcast or, talk with someone like you who is of a similar mind and heart. So yeah, thank you for that.
And it is extremely practical. I think often we lose ourselves in the abstraction or the abstract nature of the language we use can become a distraction, or we can think, boy, does this stuff ever hit the ground? Where does the rubber meet the road? But it's happening, and it's happening in a way that we have to train our minds and hearts to see this as something that is enacted, because evolution is our greatest ethical teacher. That's
Mm,
something that John Hott says quite often, and I think it's dead on. So the more we can, like Teilhard, look back upon it by backward extrapolation, look upon the evolutionary process, we can see that the cosmos itself has been practicing hope ever since its inception. And that pattern allows us to go forward and do the same. It would be really helpful if our ethics, our philosophical ethics, would begin to create systems of thought around what the cosmos teaches us. But
mm.
unfortunately, and Andrew, I think you might agree, we're far from that reality.
Yeah, yeah, bit by bit, brick by brick.
That's right.
As Ilya said on a previous episode when I chatted with her, one love at a time is how
Yeah,
we get there. And I really appreciated the way she phrased that.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So you're doing a lot of great things as a young scholar. I think that young scholars like ourselves, if I can still refer to myself as young, we are. We're young scholars considering the field, right? Yeah. Let's be honest. And not to put anyone else down, but just, looking toward the future, right? There's this reality where we're stuck in a space of tension where we have this deep spiritual hunger, yet there's somewhat of an institutional distrust. And when we look back, I think there's valid reason for that. There's also very valid reason for that great tradition. How are you living in this tension now, and how is it shaping your life?
Yeah, I'm glad you had phrased that question the way you did, because there is certainly a richness to the tradition that we don't want to ever see
Right.
lost. You mentioned already that we build upon the past. So nothing is ever lost, really. It's assimilated into a larger reality. So I want to begin by saying I am thoroughly Catholic through and through. And I say that because I think it's when you espouse a Teilhardian perspective, that can often easily be overlooked or underestimated or disregarded. So I am thoroughly Catholic, and I
Where
mean
people say, "Oh, but he was a Jesuit."
that's right. That's right. And therefore he has nothing good to offer us, right? I mean, I hear that over and over again. So, and Teilhard, I think that's an important point too. Teilhard, as a result, was a thoroughly Catholic, a Jesuit to his bones, to his core. And it's not in any tribal sense. It's a theological commitment. So to be a Catholic theologian, I believe, is to be called to do the hard thinking of the church. So it's a vocation within a vocation, to examine faith claims honestly and rigorously in light of what we now know about matter, consciousness, experience, the human person, technology, AI, the cosmos, which, as I read it, is actually the tradition's deepest vocation. If, again, by backward extrapolation, we look at what the methods were of these great thinkers, these great theologians. So there is a reason that the Catholic intellectual heritage has always insisted on the relationship between faith and reason, revelation and experience, matter and spirit, whatever language you want to use to describe that cohesion, because it is fundamentally incarnational. God is truly at the heart of matter, and every new discovery is a new revelation moment, and therefore a renewal of faith and a deeper encounter with the world. It's very exciting stuff. As a result, it often means that the parts of the tradition need to be critiqued from time to time in order that one can breathe new life in them and make them walk robustly in each new time, place, and circumstance. And I really think that's the essence of the scripture. If we examine that very same pattern, that very same negotiation, very same encounter between what the Spirit was doing in the world of the ancient Israelites, it's very clear that while the Spirit is doing new things, the Spirit is always working through circumstances, and the structures around which those circumstances are experienced necessarily change in response, in reaction to what that Spirit is doing. It's a wrestling with the angel that we see in the Hebrew scriptures, and it's Jesus contending with the circumstances, with the structures, with the situations, with the persons of his time, always coming out on the other side different for having been there in the first place. That's why we call the Spirit the breath of renewal.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that as part and parcel of that tension that you mentioned, that kind of youthful exuberance of wanting to find the novelty within theology, but also resisting what the church itself, what the institutions of our religion themselves resist when it comes to that novelty, that innovation, that depth of insight that might challenge what has always been so comfortable and known for so long. But yeah, I think that's really it. And in many ways, our greatest institutions, while they on their face claim that change is refused to change, while on the surface at times refuse to change, they themselves don't realize that they've changed multiple times already, and
Yeah.
it's inevitable for growth and development.
Yeah, and that tension is, or it can be a healthy place too, because that's really where that growth and change comes from some conscious recognition that something maybe isn't working or out of place or outdated or something, or needs to be more relevant in some way. Um, it is a small stepping stone toward a big potential result in that way, in terms of what can come from that willingness. That openness was another word that you used previously when you were talking about the term Christogenesis. To really, and you used that term before in terms of the universe is becoming more personal. It's developing more of a personality, becoming more of a person. In our approach to Omega, despite how far that may seem, that's something that also really stood out to me in that, and how those tension areas are like I said, areas of growth. They're not comfort zones. Comfort zones are good for comfort, but they're not for growing. So that tension in my life is something that I struggle with, but I really am trying to embrace it. Just be like, thank you, God. Thank you for putting me in this tension because I know some growth will come from this. And it may not be some substantial spiritual revelation. It may just be, for example, in my own role as director of a retreat center here, is just learning how to manage a client better, or handle other employees or something like that. And it's like that is a grace unto itself. Really, if it makes my day go smoother, if it makes those people's lives better, that's got it work.
And as you were talking, a phrase from Scripture came to mind that we afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted.
Mm,
So no matter what the moment is, we're taken as we are, and the circumstance really defines whether that moment in our lives is needed for affliction, not in any harmful sense, but in a sense of breaking out of a shell, or comfort, right? So it's that constant navigation that we do always in relationship, and never apart from person or the larger cosmos that gives rise to us, and therefore the God who is coming to be in every moment. That really, Teilhard used the phrase the glow of matter.
mm,
While it might always be a glow, sometimes we need a renewal of perspective in order to see it ablaze. And
yeah.
that's really important. And that also gets back to why this tension between the intellectual life and the vocational life and critiquing elements of the tradition that aren't necessarily helpful really does matter. And,
Mhm.
and it should not go underappreciated.
Yeah. So, what part of the Christian tradition, and particularly your Catholic faith, feel most alive to you right now? And which parts feel incapable or at least are struggling to speak to the future?
Yeah. This is very, I want to say a lot in a few words.
Take as much time as you need to. Yeah.
So,
Or be as delegate as much as you want with your words. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That's appreciated. I mentioned this term a few questions ago, and I think it comes back with a renewed appreciation now. What feels most alive within the larger Christian tradition, to me, is the incarnation, the claim that God truly dwells within the texture, the sinews of ordinary life. Niels Hendrik Gregerson, one of the great Danish theologians, calls it deep incarnation, God within the DNA, the beating pulse of life. And that truly it makes my faith, my perspectives, my intellectual work most alive because it's a radical affirmation. And it is the very ground of a robust evolutionary theology. As Teilhard said, the world is on fire with the divine. And we just said that a few moments ago, too. But we need eyes to see it. So I really think the tradition, the Christian tradition in particular, when it's at its best, provides those eyes. It gives us reason to fine tune our sight. It trains us to look for the divine, and I really believe this, and this is something I've been passionate about for quite some time, but the perspective of it is constantly deepening. It trains us to look for the divine, not above or beyond the world, but within it, at the
Mhm.
points of greatest depth, greatest intensity, greatest beauty, and in that moment becomes greatest truth. So always ongoing, always deepening, but always there as well, always a present. As Alfred North Whitehead said, God truly is, in a cosmic evolutionary perspective, the fellow sufferer, the great companion who understands, who is always there, always luring us forward, always the greatest reason for our hope. That's Teilhard now, of course.
Mhm.
That's in a larger perspective what I find most alive about the Christian tradition. The struggles that it maintains, has difficulty outgrowing, that can't really speak to the future. And I want to say this with great care: is any strand of the tradition that treats the cross or suffering more broadly as a destination rather than as a threshold. We get into this trouble time and time again when we decontextualize the cross, when we take it outside of the larger life and ministry of Jesus of history. And Teilhard was insistent about this too, that a theology that cannot furnish us with reasons beyond suffering, with compelling ways of bestowing life on ourselves and one another that go beyond that apparent struggle, has no account of deep directionality of evolution. So, no sense that the universe is going towards something rather than simply moving aimlessly. And this is where science scoffs at theology time and time again, both for not providing a compelling reason of God, right? So it becomes a caricature of God that the new atheists often deal with, but also that when theology claims a directionality that is not aligned with the best data and the best structures of science itself. And it tries to do these theological gymnastics to get itself out of it. So anyway, in my experience, many people today are really not asking for certainty necessarily, even though it often appears that way, but they're really asking for a framework, a story that takes both the darkness and the promise seriously. And I think if we can come together as a people of great hope who hold those two tensions in a dialectic dance for the good of the whole, we would be much better off at begging investment in the creation of a future not yet real.
Appreciate your answer there.
I hope it made sense. I got off kilter a bit, but then I went.
No, no, and I appreciate that you took the time that you needed in as many words as you needed to answer that. But it really stands out to me how you're talking first about an incarnational theology and how that really gives you hope, and there's a lot of promise there. It lends itself to the future. And then you mentioned this contrast of the cross being looked at as a destination rather than a threshold.
Right.
And as we've kind of alluded to several times previous in our conversation, so much of life is consciously engaging struggle and suffering in a way as to be open, so as to be transformed, as to experience that Golgotha moment. It's to experience what, like you said, what was the quote from Whitehead about God being a fellow sufferer?
The great companion, the fellow sufferer who understands.
Yeah, I mean, that's embodied, that's incarnational. That's
Absolutely.
God within our every breath, within our every hope, joy, triumph, and tribulation.
And only then can we see the fruits of the resurrection. And I
Right.
think that's what I mean by decontextualizing suffering, by making it an end of it, by making it an end unto itself. And so often in the Catholic tradition in particular, I hear people saying very unwisely that we are a Lenten people. And that's not true. We're a resurrection people.
Yeah.
But you need, just like you need the whole cosmic story, you need Lent in order to move you into and appreciate those resurrection moments. So it's taking both as seriously as possible. And the cross was not an endpoint. If it was, then Christianity lampoons itself
Mm.
and it falls on its face. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we really doing here in the first place? So we don't want to lose sight of that larger reality, that a fancy word in the theological tradition, that eschatological arc.
Yeah. Yeah, it puts a certain point of finality on it when presented in that light, but then to look at it as a pathway, like you were saying, Catholics branding themselves as a Lenten people,
Yeah.
which is true for the Lent season, I guess, right? We could say we're a people of Advent, where we're always in this mode of preparation and anticipation, right? I like Christians, or not Christian. I like Christians. I like the branding of Christians as people of the way or people on the way.
Yes.
It sounds much more like evolution in that way, you
Absolutely.
know? Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great descriptor for what
yeah,
we're doing today. And again, it's very true to the tradition. If you haven't noticed, Andrew, I'm all about showing people how this stuff really connects with the tradition. So if I get repetitive about, oh yeah, it goes back here, it's gone there, or embedded there, it's because I really want people to appreciate, as I think many of us do who are deep in
Yeah.
tradition.
No, you do it seamlessly and exceptionally, so keep doing
Oh,
it.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Must be that seminary training, right?
They drilled it into me. You must represent us handsomely.
Well, you do it in a way that is unique unto yourself and lends itself to the, larger mission of, I keep wanting to say Center for Christogenesis, but wiser, right? So, for your endeavors. So how do you discern, Robert, the difference between authentic spiritual evolution and mere fascination with novelty and futurism? And this is a somewhat apropos question because it's right on the heels of Pope Leo releasing his encyclical on human interaction with AI. So just curious on how you might want to answer this question here.
Yeah, and absolutely. So I mentioned before that evolution is our greatest ethical teacher, borrowing from John Hott, of course. So I think Teilhard's answer here is the answer that is helpful. And he's certainly not the only person. I know I mentioned him quite frequently already in our discussion, but he is part and parcel of my theological work as a foundation. So I use him as a touchstone for these types of questions because I think he's very beneficial here. So his answer is love, right? Love understood as the fundamental energy of the universe, the creative force like Whitehead that lures, draws distinct entities into deeper unity without erasing their particularity. So the principle of union differentiates, based in that energy of love, is the litmus test for true spiritual evolution. So it makes you how? It makes you more generally aware and fully yourself precisely through deeper relationship. It leaves those of us who take it as true more porous to that suffering, that grief that we mentioned, as well as the beauty of the world, more responsible for others and convicted in their well-being, more alive to what is actually here, quite frankly. And I think that's the whole essence of love, that you deal with the situation and the person as they are in the present fully. And then you also want what's more, what they can become.
Hmm.
So a fascination with novelty, or I think futurism was the word you mentioned, at times tends to do the opposite. It anesthetizes that true power of love. It makes the future exciting, enthralling, sure, but it does it enough to distract from the demands of the present. And Teilhard himself was always about the future coming into the present moment. So the future being the reason why the present can become more conscious, more unified, more compassionate, more empathetic. So it's really a practical question to ask of our spiritual movement or our greater trend. Does it deepen that commitment to the person, to the earth, to the depth of existence? Or does it primarily generate excitement for excitement's sake that tends to circle back onto itself rather than out of itself? Reminds me of the great quote from Soren Kierkegaard. He said, the greatest test of love, the greatest test of the true spiritual life, my language now, is waking up in the morning with your mind and being turned outward rather than inward.
Hmm.
So if the energy is acquisitive rather than self-giving, the fruit of genuine love and therefore genuine spiritual evolution is probably not present. And that, in sort of an unfortunately simplistic way, is how I discern the difference between spiritual evolution that creates novelty, that's sustaining and sustainable, and just futurism or novelty for their own sake. Was that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really confirms a lot of the intuition that I have regarding this stuff too, where I'm not against AI or futurism. I mean, obviously we're Teilhardians here, right? This is kind of our bread and butter.
Right.
But so much of what is being at least put in the forefront, like really shoved in our faces, seems very, for lack of a more eloquent word, masturbatory.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and that's not generative. It doesn't give life. It doesn't, like you say, welcome in the future in that way, or look outward to the world. It rather turns inward in a very negative, selfish way.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
we only need to look out our windows to see the profound effects of that, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Robert, I'm really grateful for all of the insight and wisdom that you've shared on our time together today. As we get ready to wind down our conversation here, we've been talking about how God's been working in your life through evolution, expanding your perspective on themes like emergence and cosmology. So, my question that I asked all my guests toward the end of the podcast is, how are you finding synergy with the sacred in your life nowadays?
Yeah. So again, a great question. I love the title of your podcast, by the way, Sacred Synergy. It not only has a ring to it, but it's so wonderfully true. And I think in many ways, Andrew, I have learned that God is less like a conductor imposing a score on reluctant musicians and more like a harmony. So
Hmm.
there's that deep resonance that draws every voice, every element into a richer, fuller chord than any could possibly achieve alone. So this is closer to what Alfred North Whitehead, who is a process theologian, I'm not sure I said that earlier, what he and Teilhard and others were pointing toward, that God is the invitation rather than an imposition in an evolutionary world. And that matters for this sacred synergy and for finding that point of the richest possible experience of transcendence in our time, knowing what that means. A God who compels is not love, because love cannot be compelled, but a God who, in an evolutionary perspective, invites, calls forth, persuades, and truly works with freedom rather than against it. This is a God who can account for radical and genuine creativity. And this is a God, I think, that's big enough to believe in a universe that's still unfolding. That is a more demanding vision in some way, especially for those of us who have been fed on a steady diet of classical theism. But it's also finally more beautiful and more believable, I think, and so worthy of that challenge.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is certainly worthy of the challenge. I agree. It's a bit foreboding at times, but so is evolution,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And
So are these forces of cataclysm and creation and regeneration that are always happening in some form. Yeah.
yeah, and this is our conversation has very much been a law of recurrence. We're saying we're kind of deepening where we've begun.
Yeah, I appreciate with Teilhard's work how his work is very much like a spiral where it keeps kind of saying the same thing but in new ways, and it gets tighter and tighter and more specific, and as you read it, at least in my own experience, it gets more personal and it seems to like hit deeper every time I read it, and it takes on a new meaning. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you picking up on that theme within our conversation too. I guess that maybe that's confirmation we're doing something right.
Well, we're listening to our greatest ethicist, right? We're listening to the
Amen.
process.
Evolution, yeah, yeah. So, Robert, how can people connect with you, and how can they find more about your work? And I'd like you to talk about too. Before we press record, you mentioned you have a couple book projects coming up. So, if you would be kind enough to share about those.
Sure. Sorry, there's something flying around here. So, the best place to find me presently is and some of the work that I have done and continue to do would be at our current website, Christogenesis.org. You'll find everything there currently related to the Center for Christogenesis and the emerging World Institute for Science, Religion, and Culture. So I think that would be the best place to start. Andrew, I don't know if on these podcasts you ask for people to give their emails, but I'd be happy to give that too if you
If
think
you
that's
want to share it, sure. Yeah.
okay. So our
I,
Nicastro, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say I can include it in the details too. So it'll repeat there as well.
Oh, okay, okay. So I guess I'm fine giving my personal email for any questions or invitations or things of that nature. rnicastro@christogenesis.org. Of course, this will all change when we go through our rebranding, but at least for the next month, that's the best way. I don't know what that email will be after that point. I would also, you mentioned about events, warmly invite anyone who resonates with what we've been discussing here today to join us for our annual conference this coming November 9th through the 11th on the theme of love, conflict, and an unfolding universe. It touches on many of the threads we've explored here today. And Andrew, I believe you said that you'll be there as well.
Planning to be, yep.
You didn't say that in this conversation, but I think we mentioned it in an earlier email or something.
Yeah.
And as you certainly know, and I want others to know as well, we have a great lineup of speakers. Not least among them is Kathy Duffy, who will be receiving the Excellence in Teilhard Scholarship Award. So for those connected to your podcast and ATA, that would be a great way to support her in this way, in this receipt of this reward. I do want folks to know too that early bird registration is still open, but spaces obviously do fill. So I would encourage signing up through our website sooner rather than later. So those are the promotions that I would like to offer. I am working, as I told Andrew before we started this discussion, on two projects, both of which grew out of my larger dissertation. One is what I hope is going to be a new view of eschatology in light of Teilhard's Hyperphysics, and the other is on Wolfhart, Pannenberg, and Teilhard and Scripture. So really tying them together in what I hope would be a more original way than has been done already. I haven't seen much completed on the integration of Pannenberg and Teilhard. And I think part of that is because Pannenberg is more Thomistic, explicitly Thomistic in a lot of his writings. But I see a lot more larger themes that connect quite seamlessly with larger themes of Teilhard. So I think that both of them were outgrowing the residue of Thomistic thought, very seriously doing so, but also in the process drawing us into a new evolutionary perspective, a new evolutionary cosmology. So I really want to try to help in my own way illuminate that for folks. And once more, show the great overlap with the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, because while the writers of scripture were not working with metaphysics, there is a radical energy and aliveness that cannot be contained by any metaphysical system. And it's directly correlating with Teilhard de Chardin, and I also think Pannenberg. So that's my work in a nutshell right now.
Excellent. That's a lot to look forward to, both in terms of all the good work you're doing with Christogenesis and its evolution, as well as what you're doing personally in your own scholarly work. So it's a lot for our audience to look out there for. And I just want to thank you again for being with us today. And I also want to piggyback on what you said about the event that you have coming up in November. I realize that so much of what these organizations, the ATA, Christogenesis, all these great Center for Process Studies, all these great organizations out there do is primarily online and virtual. And there are these in-person components, and I just want to emphasize how fulfilling it is to be able, it's homemaking, to be able to gather in person with the physical resonance, that electromagnetic resonance that we feel with other bodies in the room, similar minds and hearts especially. It's quite electric, and it's very essential for our spiritual life, I feel, as people on this Teilhardian way, which is not different from any other way in that sense, but it is a certain mind and heart, I feel like, that I've said a few times now, that we're all called to, and to share that fellowship and community is really important. So that's to say, be sure you attend the Center for Christogenesis concert in November. We've got the ATA retreat coming up this weekend, so lots of great events to look forward to, lots of great work from Robert that he's been producing, and just a bright future here that Robert really gives us a lot of hope for. So thank you for all that you've shared today, Robert.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a real pleasure, and certainly many blessings on all of your